So students, yesterday we had started with the topic of determinants of capital structure, out of which we had already discussed, I think, up to capital market conditions, if I'm not wrong. बच्चे capital market conditions तक हो गया था discuss?
रिक्वायरमेंट ऑफ इन्वेस्टर्स तक किया था.
Okay. So, Bache, the next point under your determinants or the factors that influence the capital structure is the capital market conditions. We are referring to the stock market where the securities are dealt in. So, आपकी जो capital market की conditions हैं, they do not remain the same throughout. It keeps on changing. There are constant changes in it. I hope you all know that share market कभी up जाती है, कभी down जाती है. So same ways जो हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं इसमें हम यही बात कर रहे हैं. And इसमें we are particularly referring to the timing. कि किस टाइम पे आपको फंड्स की जरूरत पड़ती है. Sometimes your capital market is in depression phase, whereas sometimes your capital market is in the boom. So जो choice of securities है that is affected greatly by the market conditions that are prevailing. अगर तो share market depressed है, then the company should not issue equity shares because लोग interested नहीं होंगे shares लेने में. They know the prices are going down constantly, so they won't be interested in investing their money into the share market. Whereas if your capital market, if your share market is in a boom period, the share market is rising, आपके जो prices हैं सारे shares के, they are constantly increasing. So in that situation, a lot of investors, they would be interested in investing their money into the share market. So during that situation, during the boom period, it is a viable option for the companies that they can issue shares because people will invest in shares then. Then the next determinant that affects the choice of your capital structure is the asset structure. The liquidity and the composition of assets of a business concern, they should also be kept in mind while we are deciding the capital structure. अगर आपके एसेट साइड में फिक्स्ड एसेट्स काफी ज्यादा हैं, majority of your total assets they are fixed assets, then it is very much possible for the company to issue or to raise more of long term debts because they have fixed assets which can be further utilized in order to pay off the debts. So each and every finance manager, they should also look into the aspect of the asset side, that what is the amount of assets that we have, what is the composition of the assets that we have. Then comes the purpose of financing. Why does the business needs fund? If they need extra funds, what is the requirement as of now? So in such a case, जो आपकी policy रहेगी, so we'll have to see for what purpose are we wanting this. अगर तो हमें जो पैसे हैं we wanted for some sort of productive purpose, हमने कोई मशीन लगानी है, हमने कोई expansion करनी है, so what is the purpose of it? So अगर तो हम लोग we are using it for a productive purpose, we are going to increase our production, we are going to multiply our production बढ़ेगी तो cash inflows बढ़ेंगे, cash inflows बढ़े तो the firm they would also be able to pay off for your debt, जो debt का interest है, जो debt के principal amount की obligation है, that can be paid out of the profit that is generated. Whereas when your funds they are required for general purpose, for non-productive purpose, which are going to be there in the organization on a permanent basis, in such a case, the firms they should rely on issuing equity shares. Then comes the period of finance. For how long do we need the funds? What is the time period? Let's say if the finances they are required by the business concern for a specified time period, they need it for a period of 5 years, 6 years. So in such a case, they can indulge into issuing of debentures rather than issuing shares, or they can also issue redeemable preference shares, which are going to be redeemed once you are through with the purpose, once you are through with the usage of the funds. Whereas if you need the funds in the business organization on a permanent basis, there is no time specified time limit for which you need your funds. You just need them for a small, a longer duration in comparison to a specific time period. So in such a case, what you should prefer, what a company should prefer, they should prefer issue of equity shares because they don't have to pay it off. The next point that comes, that is cost of flotation. Although it is not a very significant factor, but still this factor is taken into consideration. कॉस्ट ऑफ फ्लोटेशन क्या है? आप कोई भी शेयर्स इश्यू करते हो, कोई भी आप डिबेंचर्स इश्यू करते हो, उनको मार्केट में फ्लोट करने का खर्चा आता है। मार्केट में इशू करने का देयर इज एन एक्सपेंस दैट इज इन्वॉल्व्ड इन इट। सो कॉस्ट ऑफ फ्लोटेशन क्या है? यूजुअली जो आपकी कॉस्ट ऑफ फ्लोटेशन ऑफ डेट होती है, दैट इज कंपैरेटिवली लेस देन योर कॉस्ट ऑफ फ्लोटेशन ऑफ शेयर्स. So that ways each and every business house, they also need to consider that what is the cost of flotation for them, कि आपको shares या securities issue करने में खर्चा कितना आ रहा है. Then comes personal considerations. जो management है, they have the final say. So what are their personal considerations with respect to the capital structure of the firm? जो managers हैं, which are usually more experienced, and they tend to use debt more, whereas the managers who are of conservative nature, who have this old school of thought in their head कि अपना पैसा ज्यादा यूटिलाइज करो, सो उनकी पर्सनल कंसिडरेशन क्या रहेगी? दे वुड वांट दैट शेयर्स शुड बी यूज्ड मोर रादर देन डेट बिकॉज डेट ब्रिंग्स इन एन ऑब्लिगेशन अलोंग विद इट. So that ways, the consideration of the management, what does the management think, what is their personal viewpoint, that is also taken into consideration. Then next comes your corporate tax rate. Corporate tax rate is the tax rate that is imposed upon the corporate sector. So whenever there are high rate of corporate taxes, the companies, they prefer issuing debentures, because जो आप debentures पे interest pay करते हो, that is a taxable expense which is allowed for deduction for taxation purposes, whereas your dividend that is paid upon the share, which is that is not an allowable expense for your taxation purposes. So what is the prevailing corporate tax rate? That also needs to be taken into consideration. Then comes the legal requirements. जो government है, that also issues certain guidelines with respect to the issue of shares and debentures. वो एक framework decide करते हैं कि हमारा capital structure क्या होना चाहिए है. जैसे जो SEBI है, Securities Exchange Board of India, वो consent of capital issue क्या देते हैं? जो debt equity ratio है, वो आपकी 2:1 से ज्यादा ना बढ़े for capital intensive firms. फिर उसके बाद जो आपका रेशियो ऑफ प्रेफरेंस टू इक्विटी शेयर कैपिटल है, दैट शुड आल्सो नॉट एक्सीड मोर देन 1:3. प्रोमोटर्स जो हैं, उनके पास 25% ऑफ इक्विटी कैपिटल होना चाहिए है. सो ऐसे जो गवर्नमेंट है, दैट आल्सो कीप्स ऑन इम्पोजिंग सर्टेन गाइडलाइंस, सर्टेन रिस्ट्रिक्शंस. सो द कंपनीज, दे हैव टू adhere to that also while they are determining their capital structure. Any student having any doubt in this, any of the points?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So otherwise, bachche, the last topic in this chapter, it is your theories of capital structure. There are 4 theories of capital structure: net income approach, net operating income approach, the traditional approach, and Modi-Gilani and Miller approach. But studying these theories right now will not be more understandable or fruitful for you, because these theories, they have a lot of implications regarding the cost of capital aspect. So what we'll start with today is, today we'll start with cost of capital. Once we are through with the chapter of cost of capital, you'll have a thorough understanding of the various types of costs that are related, then we'll come back to these theories. Is this clear to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
I hope the screen is visible to you all.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the next chapter that we are starting with under your financial manager, that is cost of capital. As the name of this chapter is suggesting, what is it? The cost of different sources of capital. हमने पहले कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर वाले चैप्टर में भी बात करी थी कि देयर आर कॉस्ट एसोसिएटेड विद ईच एंड एवरी सोर्स ऑफ finance that a business uses. So now let's look into the meaning of it. An investor provides long-term funds, which are your equity shares, preference shares, retained earnings, debentures to a company, and quite naturally he expects a good return on his investment. अगर मैंने कहीं पे अपने पैसे इन्वेस्ट किए हैं, मैंने क्यों किए हैं? बिकॉज आई वुड वांट सर्टेन रिटर्न ऑन इट. अगर मैं कोई बिजनेस स्टार्ट करती हूँ तो मैं किस पर्पस से स्टार्ट कर रही हूँ? दैट आई वांट सम रिटर्न ऑन इट. सो इन ऑर्डर टू satisfy the investors' expectations, the company should be able to earn enough revenue. Thus, to the company, the cost of capital is the minimum rate of return that the company must earn on its investments to fulfill the expectations of the investors. Cost of capital और कुछ नहीं है, it is the minimum rate of return that each and every company must earn ताकि उनकी जो भी cost है, जो भी उनकी expectations है investors की, वो fulfill कर सके. If a company can raise long-term funds from the market at 10%, then 10% can be used as cutoff rate as the management gains only when the project gives return higher than 10%. Hence, 10% is the discount rate or cutoff rate. In other words, it is the minimum rate of return required on the investment project to keep the market value per share unchanged. अगर किसी फंड्स के ऊपर कोई मैंने फंड्स रेज किए मार्केट से, कोई लोन लिया मैंने मार्केट से जिसका इंटरेस्ट है 10%, दैट मीन्स कंपनी ने ये पैसा जहां पे भी इन्वेस्ट किया है वहां से उनको 10% तो रिटर्न जरूरी होनी चाहिए. बिकॉज if they'll have a return of 10%, then they'll be covering up the cost. Whereas if they are earning more than 10%, that is their income, that is their revenue. Therefore, for such a project, the cutoff rate or the discount rate is what? That is 10%. Therefore, it is the minimum rate of return which the firm should earn on their investment project so that the market value, अगर क्योंकि उनकी returns कम होंगे, उनको profit कम होंगे, तो उनकी market value जौन सी है वो कम हो ही जाएगी शेयर की, if they would be in losses. So that ways एक minimum rate जो उनको earn करना है, they have to keep it as a constant pace so that they can the market value of the shares that remains unchanged. In order to maximize the shareholders' wealth through increased price of shares, a company has to earn more than the cost of capital. Definitely, अगर हम कह रहे हैं कि कट ऑफ रेट से कम अगर वो earn करेंगे तो मार्केट वैल्यू ऑफ शेयर कम हो जाएगी. शेयर होल्डर्स वेल्थ हम कैसे कैलकुलेट करते हैं? नंबर ऑफ शेयर्स हेल्ड बाय देम इनटू द मार्केट प्राइस ऑफ शेयर. अगर हमारी रिटर्न्स हमारी कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल से ज्यादा रहेंगी तभी हमारे शेयर्स में जौन सा है वो इंक्रीज आएगा एंड शेयर होल्डर्स की वेल्थ जौन सी है वो मैक्सिमाइज हो जाएगी. When we'll be studying this chapter, we'll be studying the cost of capital of individual sources. हर एक सोर्सेस का इंडिविजुअल कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल कितना है हम वो भी पढ़ेंगे और उसके साथ साथ एंड में वील आल्सो डिस्कस द वेटेड कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल व्हिच मींस एक फर्म को टोटल कितना उसका कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल है. Is the meaning clear to everyone? Is the
Yes,
meaning?
ma'am.
Okay. So there are a few definitions that are given by certain financial authors. So the first one is by Ezra Solomon. They define cost of capital is the minimum required rate of earnings or cut-off rate of capital expenditure. जो आप capital expenditure करते हो उस पे जो minimum rate of earnings required है या जो उसका cut-off rate है, that is your cost of capital. As per Mittal and Agarwal, the cost of capital is the minimum rate of return which a company is expected to earn from a proposed project so as to make no reduction in the earnings per share to the equity shareholders and its market price. कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल क्या है? दैट इज द मिनिमम रेट ऑफ रिटर्न जो एक कंपनी को अर्न करना चाहिए है फ्रॉम देयर प्रोजेक्ट, ताकि शेयर होल्डर्स की अर्निंग्स पर शेयर पे भी कोई फर्क ना आए, वो अर्निंग्स पर शेयर भी कम ना हो और मार्केट प्राइस ऑफ शेयर भी कम ना हो. There is another definition by Khan and Jain. What does this definition say? The minimum rate of return that a firm must earn on its investments for the market value of the firm to remain unchanged. So minimum return जो एक firm earn करे अपनी investments के ऊपर ताकि firm का market value जो है वो unchanged रहे, that is your cost of capital. डेफिनेशन क्लियर हो गई है सबको?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So coming to the basic aspects of cost of capital, there are three basic aspects of cost of capital that we are referring to. First is cost of capital is not a cost as such. You're not paying something for it. Cost क्या है कि कॉस्ट हम जब हम जनरली कॉस्ट पढ़ते हैं, हम कॉस्ट किसको बोलते हैं कि जो चीज खरीदी उसके बदले में जो हमने पैसे दिए, दैट इज योर कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल. Whereas when we are referring to cost of capital, what we are referring to, we are referring to the minimum rate of return and not something that is an out of pocket cost that you are bearing. Then it is a minimum rate of return, as we have discussed, that it is a minimum rate of return which a firm must earn so that the market value of the shares, it remains unchanged. At least it should not reduce. Definitely increasing of it is a plus point, but whenever there is a reduction in the market price of share, that is like a cause of concern for the business concern. Then comes the third aspect, your cost of capital. It comprises of three main components. One is your expected normal rate of return at zero risk level, which is the interest rate that is allowed for the bank. Then there is a premium for bearing the business risk. And then there is a premium for bearing the financial risk on account of pattern of कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर. दैट मीन्स वी आर सेइंग कि जो आपके तीन कंपोनेंट्स क्या हैं, कि पहली बात जो आपको नॉर्मल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न है जो आपको मिलता ही है, फिर एक प्रीमियम अमाउंट फॉर द बिजनेस रिस्क दैट यू आर फेसिंग एंड अ प्रीमियम अमाउंट फॉर द फाइनेंशियल रिस्क दैट यू आर फेसिंग. इज दिस क्लियर टू एवरीवन?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
हाँ जी बच्चे, एनी स्टूडेंट हैविंग एनी डाउट? So your cost of capital, it depends upon four factors. What are the four factors that it depends upon? First is the demand and supply of capital. That how much is the demand for the capital and what is the supply. Second is the expected rate of inflation, the rate at which the prices are rising in the economy, that is taken into consideration. Different type of risks that are involved. And lastly, the debt equity ratio of the firm, which means the proportion of the debt and the equity of the firm. Is this clear to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Any student having any doubts until now? So, bache, this is it for today. We have discussed the introduction to it. Tomorrow we'll discuss the significance and the different classifications, and then we'll move on to the practical aspect of it. If there are any doubts in the topic that has been taken up, you can clear them up with me right now. Are there any doubts?
No, ma'am.
All right then, students, I'll be ending the session here. Have a good day.